Hello, I'm your host, Effie Pilarinu, and today I'm delighted to have, let me dare to say a colleague, and I will explain myself later, Patrick Schueffel, who is an adjunct professor at the School of Management in Fribourg in Switzerland. He wears many other hats too, and he is an ex-banker, a banker like us, like Lida Gliptis would say. And he's here today to really add to the voices on the very hot conversation around central bank digital currencies. Let me welcome Patrick and thank you for making the time to be with us.
Thank you very much, Effie. It's great to be with you today and to talk about this hot topic, as you mentioned.
Very hot topic. And tell us a little bit about your background, which is a long sort of winding road in banking and academia.
Right. So I did my first university degree in Germany and worked in consulting for some years, consulting banks actually, and but continued also on the university side doing a master's degree. Then I worked for quite some years in banking itself, for Credit Suisse for 8 years, for instance, but also continued to keep my ties with the university world, and I did a PhD then, and I always then continued to crisscross the lines between practice and academia, working in banking, and also doing teaching stints at the university in different workloads, and doing research and publishing. And that's what I'm doing until today. Sometimes more tied in with university, sometimes more with practice, for the time being now and today with the university.
And that's why I dare to say that we are more linked than anybody else thinks, because I've also followed that path of teaching part-time in my past at McGill University, and right now I'm teaching on a platform around the future of money, and always writing in books and publishing thoughts that are really, again, building bridges between the different parts of the ecosystem is very important. And there's room for many people to do that. We need more of that, because everybody's talking in silos. The bankers, the crypto people, the fintech people, the tech people. Do you agree, Patrick?
I totally agree. And also, it can be so fruitful to actually bring real world problems from practice, from banking to university, apply the university view, and maybe think about some solutions, and vice versa, bring some new theory, new knowledge out of university into the practice world, into banking, fintech, crypto, you name it, and ask, hey, what can we do with that? So it's cross-fertilizing if you pursue these both tracks, and I think it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating and fruitful.
It is fruitful. And I mean, traditionally, when I hear you speaking, I think of the fact that mathematicians and physicists were always bringing their theories into Wall Street and into finance. And that's how there were a lot of models that were developed around whatever it was, pricing and modeling different financial contracts, if you want. They were always with that cross-pollination with academia. The gap always existed, otherwise, sometimes more wide, sometimes more narrow, right? And it keeps moving, like, and especially now with all these technologies. So
Absolutely.
Today we want to talk CBDCs. You recently published a paper that is focused on the pros and cons of CBDCs in the Journal of Digital Assets. And I really want to focus on that. But before we take a dive into the main takeaways from your paper. I really want to ask you, I was intrigued by a little video you put out on LinkedIn, saying that, I mean, the video was Milton Friedman, and you were commenting and saying that he would be terrified, horrified rather, by CBDCs. Why?
So Milton Friedman, in this little snippet of video, of an interview with him, he describes the emergence of the internet, and he says what's missing still is a sort of internet money, an e-cash that could be used for transactions on the internet. And most notably, he gave this interview before Bitcoin was invented, but he said there will, at one point, there will be some money, and one will be able to transfer it from A to B, and A will not necessarily know who B is, and B will not know who A is. So basically, total privacy. And I think if Milton Friedman, as a libertarian, if we can call him that, would hear now that government wants to issue that sort of money, and that we will give up our names and identity for that in order to happen, the transaction from A to B, and B knowing then also who A is, he would be horrified, because that's basically the opposite of what he described in that little interview.
So here we're really not talking about technology. We're really talking about principles of transacting.
That's true. So he's, I mean, he is, or he was very much in favor that transaction could happen entirely anonymously. A doesn't know who B is, and B doesn't know who A is. Whether that's right or wrong, good or bad, but that's as far as he went in his thought.
And fast forward to today, and again, I think you shared this piece of news or evidence that right now in Australia, if you want to withdraw cash, if you go to your bank and you want to take out cash, you need to say the reason that you have to take out cash.
So yeah, so that was a little video sent to me recently by someone who picked upon the topic that in Australia nowadays, allegedly, law requires banks to ask for a reason if people want to withdraw 2,000 or more US dollars in cash, and so people are being asked these sort of questions, and not necessarily everyone wants to share for what reason he or she wants to withdraw money. And this can lead then to awkward situations, of course, if people give the true reasons. In that case, it was a sort of jokingly made video from Australia, but it's sort of disturbing that people need to provide reasons why they want to take out their money from the bank.
But it's also, Patrick, let's put it in perspective. Nowadays, if I want to send to a friend of mine from Switzerland to Austria, and this is a real example, I want to send 500 euros, I have to, I think it's over 1,000 actually, I have to say the reason that I'm sending that money online.
Yes. So I mean, one could question what that is good for. Why you need to provide a reason. In that case, however, it was the identical person withdrawing own money from the bank account. If you send it to a friend, yeah, I mean that's also questionable why you're being asked these questions. But if you withdraw your own money and have to provide a reason, I think that is rather intrusive.
Yes. But we can imagine a world where CBDCs are issued and that's not a necessary requirement. It doesn't go with it, but it could be. So before we go to the disadvantages, let's talk about what in your paper are the main advantages of CBDCs and what really resonates with people from your own experience.
Right. I would like to divide it up in two different levels that I did that in the paper, how you can identify the benefits and the disadvantages. If we look at the individual level, for instance, what the individual consumer has of benefits, then basically you can say, at least that's being brought forward in various papers, you can increase financial inclusion with CBDC. You could have actually a improved data privacy. You can have your money protected in your wallet. You can't lose it, for instance. If you look at the level of society, then you could argue we would see less tax evasion, we would see less crime happening, etc. One could argue that we see more sound implementation of monetary policies. So there isn't a series of advantages that CBDCs may bring along.
Great. Yeah. Yeah. And we're talking now either retail CBDCs or wholesale CBDCs. We're not really making that big a distinction, although up to now, most of them are retail, right?
So, yeah, so I believe, my paper is focused on retail CBDCs. Many things, so let's assume a wholesale CBDC would be implemented, and it would be solely be used among banks, and maybe banks and legal entities. There would be much less discussion about CBDC altogether, about potential data privacy breaches or surveillance. So I looked at retail CBDCs because the discussion is much more fierce in the area of retail CBDCs.
Retail CBDCs. So exactly there with retail CBDCs, what are the concerns, the big concerns, and what, you know, which are the ones? I guess they aren't the same all over the world. So what are these concerns that are creating these heated discussions?
So on individual level again, you could imagine, for instance, that the certain limits are imposed on the consumer in terms of what she could spend or transfer domestically, but also abroad. So, for instance, capital export controls could be implemented. You could implement things like forced loans. You could see things happening like nudge economics, where consumers are steered by government or nudged into a specific area. And but also you could see things like negative interest on the cash that you're holding. And on a societal level, so if we look at the society as such, you could see banks being crowded out by the introduction of CBDC, so a greater instability of the banking sector. But you could also see things like attacks of hackers, of maybe foreign malicious actors on the system, and that could destabilize the entire system.
Okay, I mean, that is a long list. There's a few of them that I haven't heard so much or they're less discussed with the masses, if you want, because they require a little bit more understanding of the system, maybe. But I want to pick on a few that you mentioned. First, the one about the risk for the banks, the current authorized intermediaries, let's call them, that have direct access right now to the central banks, right? And those are the ones that we sort of deal with. Why would the central bank have any interest to disintermediate these authorized intermediaries? We'll call them banks.
Yes. Now, in general, the interest of any organization, I would argue, is basically to gain importance, to gain also in control, to gain in power. So, and I'm not saying that in any negative sense. It's their mandate. So if a central bank has the mandate to keep price stability and to look after the stability of the entire system, they would use any means at their disposal. So if that is an additional means they could use, they would use it. That's one thing. But even if we assume that they have not this interest of crowding out, of doing away with the intermediary, the bank, if the consumer is offered, bring your 3,000 euros to the small bank around the corner, or bring it to the central bank where it will be 100% safe, the consumer, there's a large likelihood that will bring the money to the central bank, meaning that deposits will flow away from banks to central banks. And this is, and now we are maybe jumping ahead, but there are certain ideas that also it should be capped on what you can hold in the CBDC wallet in terms of the amounts. There are talks about 3,000 euros. That is sort of the amount that, for instance, in Germany, the Sparkassen and the Volksbanken, so the smaller banks, that's the deposits they have. So if they would flow off to the central bank, they would be essentially disintermediated.
Yes, but you're talking in a scenario where actually the central bank is interested to hold deposits, because up to now we haven't heard of none of the live ones, even the ones that are in pilot phase, have offered that capability. Of course, they can do it later, right?
Right, but I mean, even if they don't actively want to attract it, if the value proposition is, well, the money is a liability to the central bank from now on, not just the commercial bank, but the central bank, and we are 100% safe, people will bring deposits there. We don't know yet in detail what it will look like. As I said, I read something about holding caps at 3,000 euros, but this could be a loss for commercial banks, especially the small ones.
Yes, I understand, and especially the point of view, especially in Germany, where there's, I don't want to say thousands, but I think there are thousands.
I guess there are still, yes.
Small banks that, yes, may have to anyway, through this digitalization, be consolidated. But the point is more around whether this can create some dislocation in what we understand today as the banking system. If there's concentration, because it seems to me that the risk that you're talking about is there'll be less intermediaries, maybe, right? And a lot more concentration of power in fewer of these banks that can have the credibility or the rating to attract these deposits, and then maybe all the smaller ones go to the central bank. Is that kind of?
So yes, so there would be a further concentration in the banking sector towards bigger banks and the central bank. Since the establishment of the ECB, already thousands of banks have disappeared in Europe, and I guess that would spur this concentration further.
Yes,
and
we're seeing that in the US too. I mean, there's
absolutely
more consolidation. I like to call JP Morgan the super bank in terms of, really, we've never seen such a too big to fail bank. Here in Switzerland, we have, for another reason, UBS being another super bank. And there's all sorts of other reasons. And what I'm hearing from you is we want to minimize the risks of this continuing for different reasons.
Yes, at least don't enhance this development, and that many people point out could very well happen with the CBDC.
Yes. But in general, would you agree that all the digitalization forces are not benefiting the smaller banks? They haven't found their way of leveraging the technologies, lowering their operational costs, and also attracting the customers that are used now.
I think you have a very good point there. There is one should think that digitization actually brings down the hurdle of entry, makes things cheaper, and but actually, what I think has happened is it didn't produce a great number of banks being founded, but fintechs carving out certain parts of the business and being then in the rather luxurious position of not being regulated as a bank, because being regulated comes with such a big price tag. So I think the hurdles of entry are still very high for newly founded banks. One is, of course, the capital, but the other one is the regulation. The regulation then, which costs a lot of money in the daily business as well, right?
100%. And it's interesting to sort of go up to 35,000 feet and look at what has happened over the past 10 years, because exactly what you said has happened. We have seen these fintechs nibbling market share from different services, right? The disintermediation that started, and now they've commoditized a lot of the services. A lot of these business models are not sustainable, right? They were funded by huge amounts from VCs, they scaled, and now we are in that other phase of consolidation in the fintech space. We are already seeing fintechs buying fintechs, and a lot of banks partnering with the successful fintechs to offer those services.
Right.
So there's a big change. And it will be interesting to see what percentage of financial services will be provided by banks in the next 5 years, let's say, versus non-banks, non-licensed financial providers.
Absolutely. That will be interesting to see. What I believe, however, also happens is that fintechs often disregard the banks, and until they grow to a certain size where they figure out, oh, we somehow need to also have access to the end client, or we need to take public deposits or whatever, we need to cooperate with the bank, or we need a banking license ourselves. So for them, it's also not easy to grow endlessly and totally disregarding the banking license issue. And that will be interesting to see how that plays out in the long run.
100%. And we have here in Europe the best example of all of Revolut, who has scaled and is having all these difficulties to get a banking license. That's I think the best example that we can talk about.
Yes, absolutely.
Let's go back to cash and the topic of cash extinction. In your research and in your studies, where do you see the biggest resistance in terms of, you know, resisting the cash extinction, resisting all this digitalization? Which are the societies that really don't want this, and it's shoved on them, so to speak?
I mean, if you look at if you look at the country levels, I mean, there's interesting disparities across Europe, right? You have the Nordic countries, the Swedes who can do without cash most likely, but then you also have the hardcore cash fans, and they are certainly Germany, Austria, Switzerland also to some extent, and then also I would argue within these countries in society there is different levels of resistance, and different motivations for resistance. I mean, there are the youngsters in Switzerland, you know, who love Twint, let's say, they don't even like cash, so they will grow out of cash, I believe. There are elderly people, I would say, that who will never been actually drawn to this cashless technologies, and so the resistance can be caused by things like technology, but can also be caused by things like distrust against government, the state, tax authorities, etc. So that you can also see people saying, "No, I don't want to pay with cards. I don't want to leave traces," for whatever reasons.
Yeah. There's a fundamental resistance. Again, principles, values, attitude.
Yes, exactly.
Attitude.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So what about Switzerland? I'm always puzzled. You know, this is what do we call it? The blockchain country, or you know, the blockchain house, crypto valley, crypto country, and rightly so, right? There's a huge ecosystem here around blockchain that has grown over the years, yet we don't have a CBDC here anywhere close to others. We don't have private stable coin that's anything to talk about. Why do you think that's the case?
I think it's a combination of various things. If we look at the private stable coins, for instance, there was an example that was out there, which didn't gain any traction, but I think that was also a business case problem in a negative interest environment. As far as CBDCs is concerned, there we maybe need to distinguish between retail and wholesale CBDCs. Wholesale CBDCs, there are test runs executed by the central bank. But retail, there you have a very good question. I think people have a very healthy attitude towards government in Switzerland. I mean, for instance, the fact that income taxes are not taxed at source, but people, after the year's ended, write down what they made, submit it to tax authorities, and only then pay taxes. Unthinkable in other countries, right? So I think they want to preserve autonomy towards the state, and therefore people are very hesitant if the state goes further in expanding circles of power. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
I recently talked to a former member of parliament in Switzerland, and he said, should cash be phased out and replaced by retail CBDC, we would have a revolution on our hands in Switzerland. We would see riots. And I think with that, he described that people want to keep the government at bay, you know?
Yes, yes. And this is a country that practices decentralization at many levels. There's culture.
Absolutely.
Where
Absolutely. I mean, many people but don't know it, but Switzerland doesn't officially have a capital because it's so decentral. They have Bern as a seat of parliament, but don't have a capital because they never could agree on a central capital.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know that there's 27 cantons in this small piece of land with 27 governments and at least 4 major what are they called, the votes per year.
You mean the referendums?
The referendums, and each referendum has, you know, a list of dozens and dozens of items to be voted on. This is really the closest to a DAO, I would say, in the political or organizational realm.
A very good point that you make. I mean, on top of that, there is no constitutional court. So if there's a question that in other countries is dealt with the constitutional court, it's the people that are being asked. So the DAO is basically being asked, shall we put this law into effect, or shall we put this law out of effect? And that's the DAO. Yeah, it's a good comparison.
Yes, yes, and I'm always, you know, I'm not Swiss. I've been here for 10 years, and I do remember from the very beginning hearing about the VIR, WAIR currency that was launched, which essentially is a stable coin, right? It was pegged to the Swiss franc, and was its practicality was to help the small businesses, right, during an economic downturn, to support each other. Right. It's a community currency, if you want, in a digital form, and it was legal and constitutional, because community currencies have existed in the rest of the world, but from what I understand, the governments were fighting them and trying to make them illegal.
And it is still around today. I mean, and it has been around for, I think, nearly 100 years. So it's also therefore a wonderful precedent that you can issue private money in Switzerland. It has been done for 100 years now. It's perfectly legal. You can do that. You know, there's not a government monopoly on money. Clearly there's on legal tender, but no one can prevent you from issuing private money.
Yeah, and on that note, I think that we have to wrap it up, Patrick, and I hope you agree that we are rethinking money. We need many voices to be heard out there.
Absolutely. So what we need is people need to be informed. People need to make themselves to get acquainted with the new technologies, with the new monies, with CBDC, and need to make an informed decision. That's very important. That's a key message.
Yes, and let's do that by pointing out what each of these monies is and what it isn't, how it can be used and how it cannot be used. And then, as you said, people need to make their decisions, because clearly we are going to live in a world with many types of monies, in forms of payment. And
absolutely.
Saying at the same time that that doesn't mean that they are legal tender.
Exactly. That's an important differentiation. But in the end, two people agree on what they exchange. So in a sense, two people agree on what they want to use as money. But they are not necessarily legal tender, yes.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Effie. It was wonderful being there.